Breakfast Time for Thomas, a Thomas the Tank Engine storybook, written by the Reverend W. Audrey, and narration provided by me, Daniel Solano. Thomas the Tank Engine was a really useful engine. He was so useful that he had been given his very own branch line to run on, and he liked that very much. It didn't take him long to get used to working on the line. "You know just where to stop, Thomas," said his driver with a laugh one day. "You could almost manage without me." Thomas didn't realize his driver was joking. "My driver says I don't need him now," he told the other engines.
"Don't be silly,"
snorted Percy, the little green engine.
"I'd never go anywhere without my driver,"
Toby the tram engine said earnestly.
"I'd be frightened."
"Pooh! I'm not scared," boasted Thomas.
"You wouldn't dare go out without your driver,"
said the others. "I might," said Thomas. "Wait and see." It was dark the next morning when the firelighter came. He lit a fire in Thomas's firebox to start the fuel burning. Thomas dozed comfortably as the warmth spread through his boiler. He woke again in daylight. Percy and Toby were still asleep. Thomas suddenly remembered his boast. "Silly stick in the muds," he said, chuckling. "I'll show them. My driver hasn't come yet, so here goes." He cautiously tried first one piston, then the other. "They're moving. They're moving," he whispered. "I'll just go out. Then I'll stop and go wheesh. That will make Percy and Toby jump." Very, very quietly, he headed for the door. Thomas thought he was being clever, but really he was moving only because a careless cleaner had meddled with his controls. The cheeky little engine soon found he'd made a mistake. He tried to wheesh, but he couldn't. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. He just kept rolling along. "The buffers will stop me," he thought hopefully. But the siding he was on had no buffers. It just ended at the road. Thomas's wheels left the rails and crunched onto the pavement. "Oh no!" he exclaimed and shut his eyes. He didn't dare look at what was coming next. Up ahead was the station master's house. He and his family were inside, having a breakfast of ham and eggs. Suddenly there was a crash. The house rocked. Broken glass tinkled, and falling plaster peppered the family's plates. And guess whose head was poking through the wall looking in? Thomas had collected a bush on his travels. He peered anxiously into the room through some leaves. The station master angrily walked out and shut off Thomas's steam. The station master's wife picked up her plate.
"You miserable engine,"
she scolded Thomas.
"Just look what you've done to our breakfast. Now we shall have to cook some more."
She banged the door on her way to the kitchen. More plaster fell. This time it fell on Thomas. Thomas felt sad. The plaster tickled his nose. He wanted to sneeze, but he didn't dare in case the house fell on him. Nobody came for a long time. Everyone was much too busy. At last, workers propped up the house with strong poles. They laid rails through the garden. Puffing hard, the twin engines Donald and Douglas managed to hold Thomas back to the yard. Thomas's funnel was bent. Bits of fence, the bush, and a broken window frame decorated his badly twisted front. He looked quite silly. The twins laughed and left him. Thomas knew he had behaved badly. Sir Topham Hatt, the director of the railway, came by to take a look.
"You are a very naughty engine,"
he said to Thomas.
I'm sorry, sir,"
Thomas said. His voice was muffled behind the bush.
"You must go and have your front mended,"
Sir Topham Hatt said.
"It will take a long time. Meanwhile, a diesel named Boko will do your work."
Diesel? Boko?
Thomas spluttered in surprise.
Yes, Thomas. Diesels as Boko always stay in their sheds until they are wanted. Diesels never run off to breakfast in station masters' houses,
said Sir Topham Hatt. Boko came the next day to help out. At first he was hard to please, and didn't want to stay in the engine shed or the carriage shed, but he soon got used to working with the other engines. Finally, Thomas came back, all mended and ready for work. He and Boko became good friends, and now Thomas knows not to run off without his driver.